Morning in Willow Hill began with sirens. Not the kind that screamed down Main Street, these were sharp bursts from police SUVs, echoing off houses as they rolled slow through quiet neighborhoods. By 7:15 a.m., everyone knew the pond discovery had changed everything. The FBI wasn't combing ditches anymore, they were knocking on doors with warrants. Agent Tran's first stop was a weather-beaten trailer on the outskirts of town. The grass was knee-high, the siding buckled, and a broken swing swayed in the breeze. It belonged to Gary Latham, 42, a part-time mechanic with a reputation for drinking more than working. 2 weeks earlier, Gary had been seen loitering near Mill Creek Road. He'd told people he was just looking for scrap. Now, that didn't sound so harmless. Tran rapped on the door. It opened 2 inches. "Gary Latham?" she said, flashing her badge. "What's this about?" he asked, squinting into the sunlight. "We need to ask you some questions about Alayna Martin." Inside, the air smelled of motor oil and cigarettes. An empty beer can rolled under Tran's shoe. The living room was cluttered, tools, laundry, fast food wrappers, but one thing stood out. A pair of mud-caked boots sat by the door. The tread pattern was wide and deep. Tran crouched. "Mind if I take a look?" she asked. Gary shrugged. "They're just boots." She lifted one. The sole still had dried bits of cattail root pressed into the grooves. Meanwhile, Agent Hale was back at the pond. He stood with Sheriff Rourke, reviewing the plaster casts of the tire tracks found near Mill Creek Road. "These aren't truck tires," Hale said. "They're off-road ATV. Narrower. And they match a set seen near Harper's Pond 2 weeks ago." Rourke nodded grimly. "Gary's got an ATV." By midday, Gary Latham was sitting in an interview room at the sheriff's office. A camera in the corner blinked red. Tran slid a photo of Alyana across the table. "Do you know her?" she asked. Gary leaned back. "Everyone knows everyone here. Did you see her the day she disappeared?" "Nope." Tran tapped the photo. "Your boots were found to have plant material consistent with Harper's Pond. That's the same place we found her hoodie." Gary's jaw tightened. "You think I took her?" "I didn't take nobody." Hale folded his arms. "Then tell us where you were Saturday morning." Gary hesitated just a beat too long. Outside the interview room, Denise sat in the hallway with Clark. She could hear muffled voices through the wall. Every time they paused, her heart skipped. "What if it's him?" Clark whispered. Denise didn't answer. She was staring at the small window in the interview door, watching the agents lean in closer to Gary. She didn't want to believe the first suspect might be the last. Because if they were wrong, it meant Alyana was still out there, waiting. Inside the interview room, the air was heavy. Gary sat hunched forward, his elbows on the table, staring at the floor. Agent Tran's voice stayed calm but edged with pressure. "You told us you were home all morning," she said. "But your neighbor says she saw your ATV near the grain silos at 10:45 a.m. on the day Alyana vanished." Gary scratched his jaw. "That neighbor's a busybody. Don't mean she's right." Tran slid another photo across the table, the plaster cast of the ATV tire tread. It matched perfectly with the mud-caked boots sitting in an evidence bag on the table. Hale leaned in. "Gary, here's the problem. We've got you near Mill Creek Road the morning she disappeared. We've got your boots with pond plant material. And now, a witness putting your ATV near the silos, the same route she would have taken home." Gary's jaw worked. Then he smirked, a slow, uncomfortable twist of the lips. "You're barking up the wrong tree," he said. "You want to know who was really hanging around the silos? Ask Eddie Brewer." Outside, Sheriff Rourke frowned. Eddie Brewer was 27, worked part-time at the feed store, and had a history: petty theft, trespassing, one disorderly conduct. Nothing violent, but enough to keep him on the sheriff's radar. When Tran asked how Gary knew, he shrugged. "Because I saw him. He was leaning on the fence like he didn't have a care in the world. Watched her walk right past." Hale and Tran exchanged a glance. By the time they pulled Gary's phone records and let him stew in the holding cell, deputies were already knocking on Eddie Brewer's door. No answer. The blinds were drawn, the yard overgrown. Rourke had them circled to the back, and that's where they saw it. An old red pickup tucked behind a shed, its paint faded and streaked with rust. The hood was warm. When Eddie finally answered the door, he was barefoot and shirtless, his eyes bleary. Rourke's voice was clipped. "We need to ask you some questions about Alayna Martin." Eddie glanced past them, toward the red truck. His throat bobbed. "I don't know nothing about her," he muttered. "Funny," Rourke said, "because someone saw you watching her walk home." Eddie's lips parted, then closed. His gaze darted toward the shed again. And that's when Rourke noticed the edge of yellow fabric peeking from a plastic storage bin inside. They were inside the shed within minutes. The bin held a tangle of clothes, some men's, some clearly not. On top was a pale yellow scarf, damp and smelling faintly of pond water. Rourke lifted it with gloved hands. "This isn't the hoodie," he said. "But it's hers." Eddie Brewer was in handcuffs before the words fully left her mouth. Back at the command post, Denise sat frozen as the sheriff explained. "They're questioning him now. We found something that belonged to Alayna in his shed." Her mind caught on one word, shed. The image of her daughter's scarf crumpled in a stranger's hands burned behind her eyes. "Is she alive?" she asked. The sheriff didn't answer. That silence said more than words. The room was smaller than the one Gary had sat in, but it felt colder. Eddie Brewer hunched in the metal chair, his wrists cuffed to a steel ring in the table. His foot bounced under the chair, the chain rattling softly. Agent Hale dropped a clear evidence bag onto the table. Inside was the pale yellow scarf. "This was in your shed," Hale said flatly. "It belongs to Alayna Martin." "Explain that." Eddie stared at it for a long moment, then shook his head. "Never seen it before." Tran leaned forward. "Your fingerprints are on the bin we found it in. You expect us to believe someone else put it there?" Eddie's jaw clenched. "I didn't hurt her." "You were seen near the grain silos the morning she disappeared," Hale pressed. "That's 2 miles from Harper's Pond, and we've got witnesses who put you there more than once." "I was just out walking," Eddie said. "Watching kids walk home from school?" Tran shot back. Eddie's eyes flicked up sharply. "I didn't touch her." The silence stretched until Hale slid a second photo across the table. It showed the shoe recovered from Harper's Pond. "Recognize this?" Hale asked. Eddie swallowed. "She was wearing it. Wasn't she?" Tran's voice softened, just enough to slip under his defenses. "Eddie, if you know what happened, you can help us bring her home. That's the only thing that matters now." Eddie's gaze darted between them. Then, finally, he spoke. "I saw her that morning," he said. "She walked past the silos. I called out to her. She looked nervous. Said she was meeting someone by the pond." Hale's pen paused over his notepad. "Who?" he asked. "I don't know. She didn't say a name. Just said it was important." Eddie's voice was thin now, almost pleading. "I didn't follow her. I went the other way." Tran studied him. "Then how did her scarf end up in your shed?" Eddie hesitated. "Too long. I found it. Day after she went missing. By the fence behind my house. I didn't think it meant anything." "You didn't think a missing girl's scarf meant anything?" Hale said, his tone sharpening. Eddie looked down at his cuffed hands. "I didn't want to get involved." Outside the room, Sheriff Rourke crossed his arms. "He's lying about something. He either followed her or met her there." Hale nodded. "But this someone by the pond, that's the first new lead we've had in days." Tran tapped the table. "If it's true, then whoever she met either knows what happened. Or they're the one who made it happen." That night, Denise lay awake on the couch, the TV playing quietly in the background. Her mind replayed the words, "meeting someone by the pond." Alayna had never mentioned meeting anyone. And yet, she'd left the house without telling anyone where she was going. In the dark, Denise whispered, "Who are you going to see, baby?" The question had no answer. Not yet. The morning after Eddie's interrogation, the FBI divided into 2 teams. One stayed to keep pressing Eddie. The other, led by Agent Tran and Sheriff Rourke, headed for the woods north of Harper's Pond. The tip from Eddie was vague, but Tran had learned one thing. When a suspect gave even a sliver of a new location, you checked it immediately. Especially if it was close to the last known sighting. The woods were thick, the path narrowing until it was just 2 runs in the dirt. Sunlight filtered through branches, striping the ground in pale gold. The air smelled of damp leaves and something faintly metallic. Tran stopped at a patch of disturbed earth. The soil was darker, looser than the rest. A boot print pressed into the mud faced away from the pond. Fresh, Rourke muttered. A few feet beyond, they found the clearing. It was small, barely large enough to fit 2 cars bumper to bumper, but it was hidden from the road by a wall of pine and brush. In the center, a circle of flattened grass suggested something heavy had been there recently. Tran's gaze caught on a glint near the base of a tree. She crouched and picked it up with gloved fingers. It was a silver charm bracelet. One of the charms, a tiny heart, was bent, the enamel chipped away at the edges. Rourke exhaled. She wore this to the county fair last summer. Tran turned the bracelet over in her hand. On the back of the heart, faint but still legible, was a single word, Alyana. The scene text swept the area. In the undergrowth, they found a crumpled fast food bag, a half-empty bottle of orange soda, and, near the tree line, the faint impression of an ATV tire. Matches Gary Latham's tread, Tran said. Rourke looked toward the pond, just a quarter-mile downhill. Whoever brought her here could have taken her to the water in minutes. While the text worked, Tran's phone buzzed. It was Hale, calling from the sheriff's office. Eddie's story just shifted, Hale said. Now he says he saw her with someone at the pond, a man in a dark hoodie, maybe mid-30s, driving a black SUV. Tran frowned. That's a hell of a detail to leave out the first time. Yeah, Hale said, and it gets better. He claims the guy saw him, too. Tran glanced at the bracelet in her hand. Send me his description. I think we just found where they met. By dusk, the clearing was sealed off with crime scene tape. The bracelet, the ATV tracks, the food wrappers, all bagged and tagged. Back at the Martins' home, Denise held the charm bracelet in her palm. She ran her thumb over the bent heart, the metal warm from her touch. She never took it off, she whispered. Her voice cracked, and Clark stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her. Somewhere out there was a man in a black SUV. Somewhere out there was the reason her daughter hadn't come home. 2 days after the bracelet was found in the clearing, Agent Hale sat at his desk, the wall of evidence behind him growing denser by the hour. Pinned near the center was a single blurry photograph, taken by a traffic camera on Route 14. It showed the shadowy outline of a black SUV. The timestamp, 9:42 a.m., the morning Alyana vanished. The location, less than 2 miles from Harper's Pond. Registered owner's a no-go, Tran said, leaning against the desk. Belongs to a rental company in Birmingham. Reported missing 2 weeks ago. Hale's eyes narrowed. Stolen vehicle. Tran nodded. And here's the kicker, guess who rented another vehicle from the same company 6 months ago? Hale didn't answer. He knew it wouldn't be random. Gary Latham, Tran said. Signed it out for a job in Atlanta. Returned it 3 days late. Sheriff Rourke joined them, holding a thin manila folder. You're gonna want to see this, he said, flipping it open. Inside was a grainy photo from a security camera at Miller's feed store, taken 3 days before Alyana disappeared. Gary and Eddie stood side by side at the counter. Eddie had a bag of feed over one shoulder, Gary was paying for a 6-pack of beer. You said these two didn't run in the same circles, Hale said to Rourke. They don't. At least, not in public. Maybe they don't need to, Tran said. Not if they've got something else binding them together. That something came into focus later that afternoon when the FBI's cyber unit pulled Eddie's cell tower data. For 3 weeks before Alyana's disappearance, his phone had pinged off towers within a mile of Gary's trailer at least a dozen times. And then, on the morning Alyana vanished, both their phones had been in the exact same location for 18 minutes. The location? The clearing in the woods. By evening, Hale and Tran were back in Gary's interview room. The air smelled of stale coffee and sweat. We know you were in the clearing with Eddie Brewer the morning Alyana disappeared, Hale said. We've got your phone records, your ATV tracks, and a witness who saw you near the pond. Gary leaned back, smiling faintly. You got a lot of stories, Agent. This isn't a story, Tran said. This is us giving you a chance to explain before Eddie puts it all on you. Gary's smirk faltered. Eddie's a damn fool, he muttered. Then tell us what really happened, Hale said. Gary's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "You're looking in the wrong place for the wrong reason." At the same time, in another room, Eddie Brewer was facing his own wall of pressure. The pale yellow scarf sat on the table between him and Sheriff Rourke. Eddie wouldn't look at it. "You told the feds she met a man in a black SUV," Rourke said. "What you didn't tell them is that you've been seen in that SUV." Eddie's head jerked up. "That wasn't me driving." "No," Rourke said, his voice tightening. "But you were in the passenger seat. And the driver? We're pretty sure Gary Latham knows him." Eddie's mouth opened, then closed again. His knee bounced under the table. And then, almost too quietly to hear, he said, "You don't know what you're messing with." The silence in the interview room stretched until it became unbearable. Eddie Brewer's gaze was locked on the table, his fingers twitching in his lap. Sheriff Rourke didn't rush him. He'd worked enough suspects to know when the cracks were about to show. Finally, Eddie spoke. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," he muttered. "It was just supposed to be a scare." Rourke leaned forward. "A scare for who?" "For her," Eddie said, his voice barely audible. "Gary owed money. A lot. He told me there was a guy who could make that debt go away if we helped him with something." Rourke's pulse quickened. "What guy?" Eddie's eyes flicked up, and for the first time, there was real fear in them. "They call him Danner. I don't even know his first name." In the observation room, Agent Hale's jaw tightened. The name wasn't in their case files, not once in any of the hundreds of pages they'd combed. Tran scribbled it on the whiteboard. "Who is he?" "A fixer," Eddie continued. "He finds people who can do things for him, favors, jobs. Gary said Danner needed someone to send a message. Said the girl wasn't the target, she was just leverage." Hale stepped into the room. "Leverage for what?" Eddie's gaze darted between them. "I don't know. I swear I don't. Danner just said to bring her to the clearing. He'd take care of the rest." In Gary's interview room, Tran threw the name at him. "Danner." Gary's smirk froze. "Don't know him." "You flinched," Tran said. "That's not nothing." Gary's jaw tightened. "He's not my problem anymore." Tran leaned closer. "He's mine now. And if you think protecting him will save you, you're dead wrong. If this Danner has Alyana, then she's running out of time." Gary looked away, his knuckles white. By nightfall, the FBI had a third suspect on their board, unknown male, alias Danner, connected to organized crime in at least 2 neighboring states. The problem? No photo, no confirmed address, no record under that name. But they did have one lead. A black SUV matching the pond sighting had been picked up on highway cameras heading west, toward the state line, less than an hour after Alyana was last seen. And in the grainy footage, in the passenger seat, was a small figure with long hair. Tran stared at the screen until her vision blurred. They finally had movement, but it might be too late. By sunrise, the photo of the black SUV was in the hands of every patrol unit from Mill Creek to the state line. It was also in the inboxes of Highway Patrol, county sheriffs, and FBI field offices across 2 states. Agent Tran stood at the mobile command post, staring at a wall-sized map dotted with red pushpins. Each pin marked a possible sighting. So far, none were confirmed. At 8:15 a.m., a call came in from a highway trooper 80 miles west. He'd spotted a black SUV matching the description at a truck stop just past the county border. By the time he circled back, it was gone. "Check the security cameras," Tran ordered. Within an hour, they had the footage, grainy, but clear enough to show the driver. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a dark ball cap pulled low. And on his neck, just visible above the collar, was the edge of a snake tattoo. Rourke let out a low whistle. "I've seen that before." They pulled up old arrest records from a bust 5 years earlier. A man named Victor Danner had been picked up in a sting operation targeting illegal gambling. The charges were dropped, but the mugshot remained, and there, curling up the left side of his neck, was the same snake. "Bingo," Hale muttered. Now they had a name, a face, and a history. Danner had worked as an enforcer for a loosely organized network dealing in debt collection, intimidation, and the occasional disappearance. He was known for using rural meeting spots, places just like the clearing near Harper's Pond. The connection to Gary and Eddie was starting to make sense. Gary's dead. Eddie's petty crimes. Danner's ability to make problems, and people, disappear. By noon, an FBI tactical team was on standby. Their plan was simple: flood every possible exit route westward, push him toward choke points, and intercept before he crossed the next state line. But Danner wasn't making it easy. At 1:47 p.m., a black SUV matching his vehicle turned off the interstate and disappeared onto a network of back roads leading into the mountains. The area was a patchwork of hunting cabins, logging trails, and abandoned mining sites, perfect places to vanish. In the Martins' living room, Denise sat with her hands clasped tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Sheriff Rourke had just left after telling her about the possible sighting. "They think it's her?" she asked Clark. "They don't know yet," he said softly. "But it's more than we had yesterday." On the TV, a local news anchor talked about a person of interest and multi-agency coordination. Denise barely heard it. Her mind was fixed on one thing: if Alyana was in that SUV, every mile Danner drove was a mile further away from home. The road into the mountains was barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass. Snow still clung to the shaded ditches, even in early spring, and the air was razor-sharp with cold. Agent Tran's SUV bumped over potholes as she followed the last known route of Danner's black vehicle. Aerial support from the state police helicopters swept the ridges above, their searchlight cutting across the tree line. At 3:12 p.m., dispatch crackled over the radio: possible visual, black SUV abandoned at mile marker 64, no occupants visible. Tran floored the accelerator. They found it nose first into a snowbank, the driver's door hanging open. Tire tracks, smaller, knobby ones, led away from the scene and into the dense pines. Rourke crouched beside them. "Quad bike. He had it stashed up here. Means he planned this," Tran said. "He's heading somewhere off-road." 10 minutes later, the team was on foot, pushing through thick brush. The pines muffled every sound except the crunch of boots and the low hum of the helicopter overhead. Then Hale's voice came through on the comm: "Got something, about 200 yards ahead." They emerged into a small clearing. In the center sat an old hunting cabin, its roof sagging under decades of weather. Beside it was a battered ATV, still warm. Tran signaled the entry team. They breached the door in a burst of splintering wood and shouted commands. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and oil. A propane lantern hissed on a table. In the corner, a mattress lay on the floor, with a coil of rope and a single, pink canvas sneaker beside it. The sneaker was small. Too small for an adult. Tran knelt, her hand hovering over it. It matched the one they'd recovered from Harper's Pond. But the cabin was empty. Fresh tracks led out the back and into the forest again, two sets, one heavier, one light. The lighter set was uneven, as if the person was being pulled or carried. Rourke swore under his breath. They were just here. By nightfall, the tracks had vanished into the tangled maze of mountain trails. The helicopter lost visual in the deep canopy, and the team had to pull back before darkness turned the search into a risk for their own safety. At the command post, Tran slammed a map down on the table. "He's using the terrain to buy time. But the rope, the sneaker, she's alive. Or she was." Hale met her eyes. "Then tomorrow, we take this mountain apart. At Crime Chronicles, every crime leaves a trace and we follow it." For more true crime stories, subscribe to our channel at Crime Chronicles 365.